President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and King Abdullah II of Jordan stressed on the need for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Lebanon's caretaker prime minister appeals to Israel to fully commit and withdraw from all the regions and positions it occupied. And the United Nations Security Council convenes an emergency session in response to Russia's recent attacks targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure. It's 10 to 8 p.m. Cairo local time and you're now watching Q News. We begin today's news bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Jordanian King Abdullah II bin Hussein of Jordan have stressed on the need for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and the implementation of humanitarian aid without restrictions or conditions. The two leaders stressed their keenness on the success of the Gaza Humanitarian Response Support Conference, which will be hosted by Cairo on December 2nd. They also reiterated the importance of the international community assuming its responsibilities to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid to the Strip and emphasized the pivotal role of UNRWA in this regard. The two sides also discussed the situation in Lebanon, where they welcomed the ceasefire and underlined their belief in the security, sovereignty and stability of Lebanon. President al-Sisi and the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman al-Thani, have reviewed efforts aimed at achieving ceasefire in Gaza, the release of detainees, and securing unconditional access to humanitarian and relief aid to the Strip. The two sides also stressed on the importance of empowering and supporting all Lebanese state institutions, especially the Lebanese Army, to preserve Lebanon's security, sovereignty and territorial integrity, while affirming their aspiration to build on the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon to ease regional tensions. Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati and his Qatari counterpart Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman al-Thani have discussed the regional situation in Gaza, Lebanon and Sudan. Minister Abdulati said that the two sides discussed the importance of an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and reaching a deal to release detainees. He further stated that establishing the Palestinian state is the only path to regional stability. Sheikh al-Thani added that they also discussed the humanitarian situation in Sudan. And for more analysis, we now move to Selma in our newsroom. Selma, over to you.
Thank you, Hani. And for more analysis and further on the effect of Lebanon's ceasefire and its effect on Gaza, we are joined from Ramallah by the political science professor Raed Dabai. Welcome to Q News, Mr. Raed. And let me first ask you, what comes next, do you think, after the ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel? We will move back now to Hani once again.
Thank you, Selma. Moving on, Palestinians have expressed hope that there would be a ceasefire in Gaza now that Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a truce. But some fear it will be more heavy-handed with Gaza now that its forces were freed up from the fighting against Hezbollah. International mediation efforts intending to clinch a deal have repeatedly faltered, and the war is now in its 14th month with no end in sight. The death toll in the Gaza Strip has risen to 44,282, with the number of injuries rising to 104,880 since the start of the Israeli occupation aggression on October 7th of 2023. Medical sources indicated that the occupation forces committed 3 massacres during the past 24 hours, killing 33 citizens and injuring 134 others. Moreover, at least 10,000 people are unaccounted for, presumed dead under the rubble of their homes throughout the Strip. A number of Palestinians, including children and women, have been killed and injured since dawn in the bombing of Gaza City and Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip by Israeli warplanes. Medical sources reported that 8 people were killed in an Israeli bombing of the Al-Tabi'in school in Gaza City at dawn. 1 person was also killed in a bombing of a house on Baghdad Street in Shuja'iyya, and 3 others died in an attack on the gate of Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, causing additional injuries. We will go back now to our newsroom with Selma to have more analysis on the story.
Thank you, Hani. And we seem to have lost Mr. Ra'id, but we're back again for further analysis on the effect of Lebanon's ceasefire and its effect on Gaza. And we're joined from Ramallah by the political science professor, Ra'id al-Dabai. Welcome to Q News, Mr. Ra'id. And let me just ask you first, what do you think comes next after the ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel? And the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, the UNRWA, has warned of the repercussions of hunger in the Gaza Strip, reaching critical levels, calling for an immediate ceasefire. The UN agency said in a brief statement on X that hunger in Gaza has reached critical levels as people search for leftover food in the garbage that has been left for weeks. The agency added, with the onset of winter, the situation is rapidly deteriorating and survival is becoming impossible without urgent humanitarian aid. It closed its statement by saying that a ceasefire must be reached immediately. And we are back to you again, Hani.
Thank you, Selma. The UN has reported that Israel either denied or impeded all life-saving assistance attempts in the northern Gaza Strip in November. Deputy spokesman Farhan Haq has said that 37 attempts to reach Palestinians in besieged areas of North Gaza with life-saving assistance were denied by Israeli authorities. Haq noted that 4 missions were approved, but then impeded on the ground and accomplished only partially. As winter approaches, Gaza's humanitarian crisis worsens with heavy rains, flooding and limited aid. The UN warns it could take 2 years to provide essentials as suffering intensifies amid ongoing restrictions.
The humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip is expected to worsen as winter sets in and rainfall increases, compounded by ongoing Israeli restrictions on aid delivery. The United Nations has warned that at the current pace, providing essential supplies to the war-torn enclave could take up to 2 years, leaving its population in dire conditions. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, has reported that recent rains have already brought significant hardship, putting 500,000 people at risk of flooding. In a statement, the agency warned the situation will only get worse with every drop of rain, every bomb, every strike. UNRWA spokeswoman Louise Wateridge told the Financial Times that frequent winter rainfall will likely result in sewage accumulating in low-lying areas, exacerbating already dire living conditions due to extensive infrastructure damage caused by Israeli bombardments. Health risks are also set to rise, with malnourished populations especially vulnerable to the cold weather and unsanitary conditions. Basic supplies, including mattresses, blankets, and tarpaulins, are urgently needed to help Gazans endure the winter. However, Wateridge emphasized that Israel's continued restrictions on humanitarian aid entry mean that delivering these necessities to all in need could take years at the current rate. She also highlighted the despair gripping Gaza's families, many of whom are left in rags or without shelter amid relentless challenges. As the humanitarian situation deteriorates, international calls for sustained and unrestricted aid delivery grow increasingly urgent, underscoring the critical need for immediate action to alleviate suffering in Gaza.
The Israeli occupation forces have detained at least 15 people, including a child and a student, in the occupied West Bank during the last 24 hours. The Detainees and Ex-Detainees Affairs Commission and the Palestinian Prisoners Society reported that detention operations occurred in Qalqilia, Ramallah, Hebron, Nablus, Beit Lahem, and Tubas, where Israeli forces carried out military raids and destroyed homes and infrastructure. The operation involved widespread raids, abuse, assaults, threats to detainees and their families, and the vandalism of homes. Israeli occupation forces have stormed the city of Tubas and the Farah refugee camp in the south. Local sources reported that military vehicles and bulldozers stormed Tubas and Farah camp and with gunfire heard. A house in Farah was turned into a military barrack and bulldozers damaged citizens' property. The forces initially raided Tubas at dawn, withdrew, then returned for another assault. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said the crisis in the Middle East continues to escalate as a result of Israel's aggressive militaristic policies supported by the United States. Lavrov added that bringing the situation with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict back to normal is the only path to improving the situation across the Middle East. He said creating conditions for achieving a two-state solution would be the next step in terms of moving beyond the violent phase in this crisis.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين. وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati has appealed to Israel to fully commit and withdraw from all regions and positions it occupied, hours after the truce between Israel and Hezbollah was activated. A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah was held after both sides accepted an agreement brokered by the US and France. The agreement is a major achievement for the U.S. in the waning days of U.S. President Joe Biden's administration. The Speaker of Lebanon's parliament, Nabih Berri, has declared that Lebanon is entering a new phase after what he described as the successful thwarting of Israeli aggression. Berri added that the war with Israel had been in the most dangerous phase that his country had endured in its history. He called on displaced citizens to return to their land, even if it's in ruins, emphasizing the importance of resilience in rebuilding the nation. The international community, including the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, Germany, the United Nations, Egypt, Turkey, Jordan and Iran have welcomed a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah. The community welcomed the ceasefire that went into effect earlier on Wednesday between Israel and Hezbollah and expressed hopes that it could also pave the way towards an end to the war in Gaza. Long displaced residents of South Lebanon have started returning to their homes after a ceasefire took effect at 4 a.m. local time. Thousands of people made their way into southern Lebanon, defying a warning from the Israeli military to stay away from previously evacuated areas. The ceasefire has brought relief across the nation, coming after days of some of the most intense airstrikes and clashes since the war began, though many wonder if the agreement to stop fighting will hold. The Lebanese military has asked displaced people returning to southern Lebanon to avoid frontline villages and towns near the border, where the Israeli military is still present until the troops withdraw. Thousands of people have been returning to other previously evacuated areas in South Lebanon in defiance of an Israeli warning to avoid all previously evacuated areas. Many of those areas were hit by strikes just hours before the ceasefire took effect. Syria's state news agency has reported that Israeli strikes late yesterday on Lebanon's northern border crossings with Syria killed 6 and wounded 12. Lebanon's transport minister, Ali Hamie, said the strikes targeted Lebanon's 3 northern border crossings with Syria for the first time. The strikes came moments after U.S. President Joe Biden announced that a ceasefire would come into effect at 4 a.m. local time. Israeli raids on Lebanon's eastern crossings in recent weeks had already sealed off those routes into Syria. The United Nations Security Council has convened an emergency session today in response to Russia's recent attacks targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Russia's representative to the UN Security Council said its military institutions were hit twice this month using long-range Ukrainian and American missiles. He added that it is doing its utmost to thwart these attacks. While Ukraine's UN Security Council representative has stated that North Korea sent 20,000 containers of weapons to Russia for use in operations against Ukraine. The meeting follows an official request from Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the record number of drones launched by Russia overnight represents nearly 200 proofs that Russian ambitions are utterly detached from any ideas of real peace. Russia launched 188 drones against most regions of Ukraine in a nighttime blitz. The Ukrainian Air Force said on Tuesday, describing it as a record number of drones deployed in a single attack. Most of the drones were intercepted, according to the Air Force, but apartment buildings and critical infrastructure, such as the national power grid, were damaged.
Нашу інфраструктуру від більшості таких загроз, але, на жаль, не на 100%.
Ukraine's armed forces have used US-made ATACMS, operational tactical missiles, to hit objects in Kursk region over the past 3 days, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. A total of 13 such missiles were confirmed as being fired by the Ukrainian forces. 10 of them were intercepted, but 3 hit objects, causing damage to a radar station of Russian forces and minor damage to the infrastructure of an airport in Kursk, said the Russian Defense Ministry. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said the United States is continuing to surge security assistance to bolster Ukraine's defenses in the east. Blinken said Russia's deployment of North Korean troops in its war with Ukraine was a matter of grave concern for the G7. He added that Washington is watching what Russia is and may be doing for North Korea in return.
Now the involvement of troops from North Korea. And let me say on that, that
In the economic news, the Commerce Department reported that the U.S. economy grew at a 2.8% annual rate in the third quarter, driven by strong consumer spending and a surge in exports. This marks a slowdown from the 3% growth in the second quarter, but the economy has topped 2% growth in 8 of the last 9 quarters. Consumer spending rose 3.5%, the fastest pace since early 2023. And exports increased 7.5%, the largest gain in 2 years. Despite steady growth, high prices led voters to elect Donald Trump for an economic overhaul, with Republican majorities in Congress. The International Monetary Fund's November 2024 Regional Economic Outlook for Asia and the Pacific projects projects growth for the region to contribute approximately 60% to global growth in 2024. The regional growth projection for 2024 has been marked up to 4.6% from 4.5% in April, largely reflecting the overperformance in the first half of the year. In 2025, more accommodative monetary conditions are expected to support activity, resulting in a slight upward growth revision to 4.4% from 4.3% in April. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez announced 2.3 billion euros in additional aid on Wednesday to rebuild the Valencia region after devastating floods killed over 220 people on October 29th. This brings total government aid to 16.4 billion euros, including 14.36 billion pledged earlier. Sánchez assured continued support until affected areas return to normalcy, as 5 people remain missing following the region's worst flash floods in modern history.
El segundo, el parque móvil, y el tercero, el tejido productivo. Una dana que, como todos sabemos, no tiene precedentes en nuestra historia. Extraordinario, un Consejo de Ministros mañana, en donde va a aprobar.
These are all the news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's key stories. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Jordanian King Abdullah II stress on the need for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Lebanon's caretaker prime minister appeals to Israel to fully commit and withdraw from all the regions and positions it occupied. And the United Nations Security Council convenes an emergency session in response to Russia's recent attacks targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour, but please don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.